Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Ageless Athlete Podcast. This is your host, Kush Khandelwal, bringing you a fresh new episode this week with a legend and a story that I can't wait to share with you. Imagine hurtling down Rocky Mountain trails in the 1980s on a bike with no suspension, rock hard tires, and toe straps, no disc brakes, no carbon fiber, no fancy gear. Just raw skill, grit, and a pioneering spirit. That was Ned Overend's world. He was there in the earliest days of mountain biking when a band of counterculture athletes turned repurposed balloon tire cruisers into race machines, carving out a brand new sport that would one day become a global phenomenon. But what makes Ned's story so remarkable isn't just that he was there at the birth of mountain biking or that he won the very first mountain bike world championships. It's that decades later, into his 60s and now almost 70, Ned is still racing, still competitive, and still outpacing athletes half his age. Today, we dive into the mind and life of one of endurance sports' great ageless wonders. What's kept him thriving for so long? A big part of it is Ned's quiet mastery of the fundamentals. He's someone who isn't chasing fads, but is so incredibly dialed in. Whether it's how he trains, how he recovers, or even the type of olive oil he starts his day with. This isn't just a story for elite cyclists. Whether you are a recreational athlete, a weekend warrior, or simply looking to stay active and sharp in your later years, Ned offers a refreshing perspective on longevity, curiosity, and finding joy in movement for a lifetime. Let's jump into the world of Captain Ned Overend. Those of you who have been with the show for a while, thank you again. And those of us who are joining for the first time, welcome to Ageless Athlete. And yes, if you enjoy hearing about stories and secrets of high performing athletes from the world of outdoor sports, you have found your place. Welcome to the show.
I'm in Durango, Colorado. It's where my wife and I live. We've lived here for 45 years, I think. We have a house in Fountain Hills, Arizona. So we spend about 2 months of the year down there and the rest of the time up here. But I am in Durango right now, and we have about a foot of snow outside, and it's 38 degrees. So typical February in Durango. So I like to start off every morning with 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I love olive oil. I drink a lot of olive oil throughout the day. And then I have usually avocado toast. But to me, the starting off with 2 tablespoons of olive oil, I think it helps mute the insulin spike of having simpler carbohydrates for breakfast. And I have it with a cup of coffee, and then, like I say, usually right after that, I have like avocado toast. Sometimes it's toast with jam. But I start off small, and then I'll have a little later, after I have my coffee and stuff, I'll have maybe scrambled eggs on toast.
I have heard a few people talk about this, the benefits of olive oil. To start off, I like to cook most of my foods with olive oil, but when I go to the supermarket, I see this overwhelming array of different types of olive oil. So in your case, since you are, drinking the olive oil neat in the morning, what is your preferred type of oil to drink?
Well, I've actually read a lot about the different types of olive oil, and one that is highly rated is the kind we get from Costco, and I believe it's Kirtland, and so there's some good information behind the quality of that and the quality control. So that's the type that we get, and if you drink a lot of it, it can be expensive. So buying it almost in bulk like that works well for us.
Very cool. And Ned, I heard that you and your wife have lived in Durango for 45 years. Am I correct in assuming that you guys have been married or something like that for that long?
Yes. We got married in 1981, so that's
Wow.
about that long. 44 years, I guess.
What's your secret for this wonderful relationship?
Oh, that's a good question. I have a joke I like to tell. When my kids were teenagers, it's very hard. They ran into some trouble spots. Our kids did, and it was very frustrating and a hard time in our lives. And I like to say that, we wanted to break up, my wife and I, except neither one of us would take the kids. So we had to stay together. And now we've gotten through that time in our lives. But I think, you hear a lot. It's about compromise and respecting each other and at times giving each other some space. I've done a lot of traveling. And so there's times when my wife is looking forward to the next time that I'm traveling, so that I'll get out of her hair.
I love it, Ned. For those of us who don't know who you are, Ned, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am an employee at Specialized Bicycles, and I've been an employee for Specialized for about 35 years. And starting around 1980, I was a car mechanic and a motorcycle mechanic, and I was also a mountain runner here in Durango. So, like all runners, I got injured, and as all runners do at times, right? So I turned to cycling, and I was an accomplished mountain runner. But there wasn't much money in mountain running, so I didn't consider that I would ever make a career out of it. But when I started cycling, I started winning several races, and cycling was actually something where you could get sponsorship and make a career of it. So I switched from being a mechanic to working in a bike shop, where the owner of the shop was supporting me in trying to become a professional cyclist. And during that time, mountain bikes started being sold in the market. And so I had a history earlier. I was a motorcycle mechanic. I'd ridden motorcycles off-road, done some motocross. So mountain biking, with my experience in road racing and having a history in motocross, it was perfect for me. So I jumped into mountain bike racing and was quite successful at it. first 4 years, starting in 84, I was sponsored by Schwinn. In 88, I was picked up by Specialized, and I've been with Specialized Bicycles since 88. So I had a long history in mountain bike racing. I won the first World Mountain Bike Championships in 1990. I've won 6, national championships. And then went on in 96, I retired from mountain bike racing. I still mountain bike race, but I didn't follow the World Cup as my main focus. And I did some Xterra triathlon. So in Xterra triathlon, I was won 2 world championships in Maui in 88 and 89. And I've just done a variety of bike racing and off-road triathlon, and here I am. I still do some racing. I'll do some mountain bike, some road racing, some gravel racing. I'm fortunate. I'm sponsored, or I'm employed by Specialized in sports marketing and product development. So I'm also one of their ambassadors. So really, training and traveling to events and racing is kind of part of my job. And it's one of the reasons I've been able to sustain for so long good fitness and a cycling career that goes in. I'm actually going to be 70 this year in August. So my racing age is now 70, because your racing age is whatever you are at the end of the year. So 70 is considered my racing age. So that's a big year for me. That's a big milestone.
Well, big milestone, Ned, and congratulations on truly an incredible career. And one of the things I sense about your life is just this long haul of consistency. You have been married, have lived in the same city, and have been working for the same company, all for close to 5 decades. And yeah, I'm just wondering if this theme runs across in other parts of your life ethos of starting something and then sticking with it for a long time. I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24/7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code Ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code Ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
Well, I think the things you've mentioned, the living in Durango. I mean, Durango is a great place to live, and starting just describing that a little bit. I mean, it's a beautiful town. It's 6,500 feet, which is a great training altitude, right? I mean, you can get thicker blood by training at higher altitudes, but it's harder to recover. And I think, people who train at higher altitudes, they lose something in their fitness because they don't have the oxygen to supply to their muscles, in the intensity of training. So as far as the altitude of Durango, a lot of times I travel down to lower altitudes to events. But 6,500 feet, I think is a really good altitude to live and train at for athletic performance. The the town, it's got a river running through it, and one thing I love to do and I look forward to every summer is that I swim in the river. And I will actually, it's not for a long time, but it's, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I'll swim into a rapid, right? So I'll go for a ride earlier in the day, it's hot, might be 80 degrees. I'll jump in the river, swim into a rapid, it's like cross training, but it's refreshing, and it is actually one of the great joys of my life is swimming in the river.
Well, you may have just revealed perhaps one of your other training secrets, which is this cold plunge that you do after training into this, I'm guessing, like glacial melt, river water. Does that allow you to recover better after a long ride?
I have experimented with and done cold plunges. Now, this river is starting in May. I mean, it's really cold, right? It's probably in the 40s. But I think the water, when I'm swimming in it for like 20 minutes at a time, I wait till it's more later in June, early July, and then I think it's in the 60s. So it definitely chills me down. It's definitely invigorating. It's not an ice plunge by any means. But I used to soak just my legs in the water in May, after some long workouts. We have an iconic road race here that goes from Durango to Silverton. It's 50 miles, 6,000 feet of climbing, and it's kind of the big road cycling event in this town for the year. So I started training for that in May, and I used to do cold plunges after some of those May training in ice water, where your legs just went totally numb. And now I have less discipline for that. I don't want to suffer that badly. So I wait till the water warms up a little bit in the river before I'm doing those cold plunges.
Ned, it would behoove more of us to suffer a little bit more. And it doesn't always have to be long bike rides with cold plunges that follow. I think if more of us would maybe even do one of the two, or just be outside more and enjoy the wonders of nature, I think it may result in a healthier society. I would love to spend a little bit of time, Ned, on your cycling career. So many things I am fascinated by. But to begin with, I believe your fans would call you Captain America. Is that correct?
Well, I have a nickname of being captain, but it comes from being the leader of the specialized cycling team, the specialized mountain bike team. So that's a nickname I got of captain, but it's not Captain America, it's just captain. And It was from being the leader of the specialized team. And I was older, so I was something that the younger riders and the new riders looked up to. As I was essentially acting as their mentor. So that's where I got the nickname Captain. And,
Sure. And well, nevertheless, you have a legion of fans who have followed your exploits in the world of sports over the decades. And I'm curious, if I was to ask an average fan, what's that one race or moment that they remember you for after all these years? What do you think that would be?
Well, I think the World Championships in 1990, it was a big event. And it was a big event because mountain biking was discovered in the U.S. It was, the history of mountain biking really starts at an event in the Bay Area, I would say, called Repack. It was a downhill race. It was this group of guys that started racing these paperboy bikes, these fat tire balloon bikes, cruisers, you'd call them. And they started racing them down this hill in the headlands of Marin County. And the guys who were doing this happened to be guys like Tom Ritchie and Gary Fisher and Joe Breeze, guys that went on to build mountain bikes, with gears, with brakes, and that developed out of these guys doing that event. So mountain bike racing started. It blew up from that into cross-country racing, and that was kind of in the mid to late 70s that those guys were doing that. And so mountain bike racing started in the U.S. It was a U.S. sport. It was dominated by Americans in the beginning, and then they had the first World Championships that the UCI is recognizing in 1990. So they had already had some unofficial World Championships before that, starting in 87. They would have one in Mammoth, California, which was a massive event with thousands of spectators, hundreds of riders. And then they would have one in Europe. They had one in Germany, they had one in Switzerland, they had one in France. And I won, so there was 6 world championships essentially before the original Worlds, one in the US and one in Europe. And I had won 3 of those. But now the UCI says, okay, this is the real world championships. So all the countries are having their national teams come over, Switzerland, Germany, from Asia and everything. And this will determine the first real world championships. And I had already won 3. And I'm like, what do you mean? I already won 3 world championships. So there was a lot of pressure on me to win this world, to prove that, okay, I am one of the most competitive mountain bikers at the time. So it was a battle between me and Thomas Frischknecht, who was, I think I was probably 33, 34 at the time. Thomas Frischknecht was like 19. So it was kind of the little bit older guy. Thomas Frischknecht had won world championships in cyclocross, which is a sport, where you run with your bike through certain sections. And at the ski area, lap after lap, it had just come down to the 2 of us. And on the final lap, there was a super steep section of the front of the ski area, and I was riding it, and Thomas Frischknecht was running it. He was getting off and running it. And we were kind of staying together, but on the last lap, I managed to get away from him to put a gap on him when I was riding. So that's kind of a classic moment, that led to me winning the first World Championships against Europeans and stuff like that, and older guy versus younger guy kind of thing. So it's
amazing. So you are, let's say almost twice his age, Ned, and you beat him in the World Championships. And I would, later on in the conversation, would love to dig a bit deeper into some of your talents in being able to be so consistent as you got older. Just sticking with the origins of the sport a little bit. So I mountain bike recreationally a little bit. And actually, I am from San Francisco. So I learned to, let's say, mountain bike and bike in maybe some of the same trails where the sport originated. But again, like I said, I am just, very recreational. But one thing about the sport that I find fascinating, when I think of like some of these outdoor sports we take part in, I find that people who are attracted, they sometimes don't fit into normal culture in some ways, right? And I'm just curious, what kind of personality or athlete was drawn to mountain biking, back in those days, let's say 4 decades or so ago? And was it like this band of, like, let's say misfits, adventurers, perhaps people who didn't fit into the mainstream world of cycling or running?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Well, those original guys, I'd say They tended to be hippies, although, mid-70s, right? I mean, people tend to, they had longer hair. They probably smoked a little pot before this race, I don't doubt. They're living in Marin County, right? So you know the culture. And I grew up in Marin County. I went to Redwood High School in Larkspur, California, which is in Marin, right?
Sure.
So there was definitely some counterculture happening in those days. But these guys were also, they were into road cycling. Some of them, Gary Fisher and Tom Ritchie, were also road cyclists. So they had that fitness side of the sport as well. So, and I think another thing, they have these fire roads all over Marin County, which are beautiful, and they're beautiful roads to explore. And I learned that. I was a runner, a high school runner, and running on the trails and the roads around Marin County was one of the things that drew me into endurance sports. I think if I was a high school runner in a flat area, in Iowa or something like that, a cross country runner, I would have been. It's way less compelling, to run on whether it's dirt roads.
Yeah, I can't agree more. It is just so breathtakingly beautiful up in the rolling hills of Marin, because you have those beautiful redwood vistas on one side and this, the rolling swells of the Pacific on the other. Like, you don't even have to be a good cyclist to just enjoy being up there. And maybe I do envy this bit about your time, Ned, is nowadays a lot of the fire roads, a lot of those are basically closed for cyclists, and I'm guessing back when you were, it was still more open for your band to go and explore.
Well, actually, when I was running the trails, of course, trails have always been open to runners, and I discovered those trails, and like you say, there's a lake system, like 4 lakes up there, and you would, at different levels in the mountains, and a typical run might be I'm going to do just Phoenix Lake, or if you're doing a longer run, I'm going to go up around Phoenix Lake and Bontempi Lake and Alpine Lake, and on these trails through the redwoods, with redwood, droppings on the trails, so they're soft, and it just drew me into running. I loved it. Now, when I started, I moved to Durango before I started mountain biking, so I didn't mountain bike on those trails in the early days. But when I had gone back there for different events, there's only certain areas around Marin, like China Camp. There's a Boy Scout camp as well that has trails, and most of the trails are closed to mountain bikes. Because a lot of that area was had a lot of influence from horseback riders, and the horseback riders organized early to keep the mountain bikes off the trails. So it's
Right.
but the fire roads, they could still ride on the fire roads, and the fire roads are spectacular, and there are different trail areas that you can ride on your mountain bike. And over the years, as mountain bikes have organized more, there's been more trails open to mountain bikers in the Bay Area. But it's one example of why advocacy is so important for, people to get involved, because numbers matter, and there are a lot of cyclists, and if they join their or advocates of their trails groups, then we can build more trails and keep more trails open to cyclists.
Ned, you were racing mountain bikes again back in those days, early days, when the sport was, still finding its identity. And what were those early races like? Were they just pure chaos?
Sometimes they were. Well, the packs weren't too big. I mean, because it was kind of a new sport, but the bikes were pretty primitive. A hardtail in the late '80s. I mean, no suspension forks, toe clips and straps. And we had tires. That tires had tubes. There was no tubeless tires, And in those races, you had to, there was no spare wheels or pits or anything like that. The rules were you had to repair your own equipment. So if you had a flat, you always carried a spare tube and a CO2 cartridge. But in order to prevent flats, we rode our tires at 40 to 45 psi, which is rock hard. So no suspension, rock hard tires, and you're racing on some really rough courses. So it was pretty grueling in that respect. I mean, the equipment is so good now. I mean, you look back on it and it was really primitive. I mean, that was the best. It was state of the art at the time, but it's improved so much now with index shifting and disc brakes and tubeless tires and full suspension bikes. Now I pretty much ride a full suspension bike all the time.
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing. It's all me, trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this. Ned, I also own let's say a mid-level full suspension bike, and I'm still a scaredy cat when trying to negotiate rough terrain and even small jumps. And you were bombing down in this heavy pack of riders down these steep, rocky terrain. And I'm sorry, I just had to chuckle when you talk about how you were getting injured as a runner, and you shifted to mountain biking. Any serious mishaps or injuries that you had to navigate, or were you just so naturally skilled at mountain biking that you were able to continue?
Well, knock on wood.
Indeed.
I have not had many serious injuries from mountain biking. I've lost a lot of skin, let's say, road rash and stuff like that. Most of my injuries from cycling have come from road riding. And I do a lot of road riding. I mean, I did a lot of road racing as well, but I also, for training for mountain bike, I would do a lot of road riding. So road riding in packs, and that is where my biggest injuries have come from. But again, very few broken bones. I've never broken my collarbone even. So I've been fortunate in that respect. Now, when I started mountain bike racing, I had the advantage of having raced motocross and motorcycles off-road, which I'd started in high school. And then I was a motorcycle mechanic at San Francisco Yamaha and San Diego Suzuki and stuff like that. So those skills also helped me set up my mountain bike. Because in the early days, you had to repair. You didn't have a mechanic, and a support staff going with you like you do these days. So you had to set up your own bike, and you had to fix the bike on the trail. So those mechanic skills from motorcycles was a big help, as well as the experience of riding a motorcycle off-road. Because, things are happening fast when you're on a motorcycle. And so it helped me adapt to mountain bike racing pretty quickly. But again, I haven't hurt myself. The thing about mountain biking is that usually when you crash, it's your own fault. You've made a mistake. Whether you're going too fast for the conditions or whatever. In road riding, unfortunately, you can't avoid crashing because you're in a pack more because of the drafting. And when people around you crash, a lot of times you go down too. So you have less control of your circumstances. You watch the Tour de France. I mean, those are the best cyclists in the world, but they get thrown on the pavement for whatever reason, and a lot of times just because there's a mass crash, from somebody in the pack crossing wheels or whatever. So I like that aspect of mountain biking, is that you can control your own safety. You have a lot more control over it than in road racing and road riding.
Absolutely. The pack riding and biking in the road, I avoid that, even though there are lots of group rides that happen in San Francisco. I'm just, I don't have the skills. I can just about manage my own safety when I'm riding solo, and doing that in a pack, it just seems, it just seems kind of otherworldly in being able to do that at high speeds and turning corners. The bikes back then were so different than the bikes we have today. And yes, sounds like you had a bit of an unfair advantage with your skills as a bike mechanic, and you were likely able to both tune the bikes in maybe a superior way, and also maybe able to repair the bikes, maybe adjust them on the fly, which sounds like a really good skill to have. The bikes these days have evolved so much, it's ridiculous, like the range with both equipment, type of material, with all kinds of bikes. But other than that, how has the sport evolved from those early days? And maybe in which ways has it remained the same? Has it kept its roots?
Well, its roots, it's definitely very different now. Now, in the early days of mountain bike racing, cross country racing, right? And in the beginning, there was only cross country racing. They didn't have downhill. They just considered that cross country racing included downhill, right? It happened in a lot of ski areas. You'd climb to the top of the ski area, and then you'd be racing down, and you'd be doing laps of those courses. And the courses tended to be longer. A lot of our cross country races were 2.5 to 3 hours. Now that over the years, the UCI, which is the governing body of all cycling, but they govern mountain biking, they've mandated that they want the cross country races in the World Cup to be about an hour and a half long. So, they're shorter laps. So they tend to be like 5 or 6 mile laps. And they want this for TV coverage, right? So it's easier to have access for spectators, and it's easier to cover on TV. So that means they don't have as long of climbs, and the races are shorter. So it's quite the sport has really changed in that an hour and a half race, you start off really fast and the pace is really high, and the whole time. So before, if you're racing 2.5, 3 hours and you have some climbs, you have climbs that could have been 2,000 foot climbs at the time. And it actually favored a guy more like me. I tend to be, excel at the climbing. I'm a skinny, lighter guy. So mountain bike racers today, I would say they're a little bit bigger. They're a little more explosive, and a little bit more power riders. So it's interesting. It has changed. To me, there's still a connection to the roots, because if you look at these mountain bike racers on social media, they're having fun out in the woods riding their bikes. Loving the training aspect, the fact that they are professional mountain bike racers, and that they're going all over the world riding beautiful trails and having fun on those trails, and the scenery, and getting in the backcountry. I think that part of it is still very much alive.
Ned, I look at these outdoor sports, and sometimes I look at, let's say, more mainstream sports, and in the last few years, more and more of these outdoor sports are now in the Olympics. Obviously we have had mountain biking for a while, but now we have rock climbing, we have surfing, and there is more money in these sports now than there was, let's say, when you started. But at least I know this from the uh, climbing world that most climbers still have to struggle to make a living, even the world's best ones. In cycling, again, in mountain biking, do you think more of the top cyclists, do you think there's more, let's say, intrinsic motivation, or do you think there are also these other extrinsic factors that attract and keep these elites at the top?
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together: training, aging, mindset, and all. You will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
So if you're motivated by money alone, uh, there's not enough money in mountain biking for enough people to really sustain that motivation. You have to love the sport. You know, there are some people making some good money at mountain biking, but geez, if I had to say the actual numbers, you know, the guys at the top, the very best riders, you know, they'll be making $200,000 or $300,000 a year, right? Which is good money. But the amount of people, riders making that money, you know, say just on the guys' side, maybe 10 guys. And then it drops off really quickly, you know, and there might be, you know, another 10 making 50 to 100. And then it drops off so that, you know, it's people who are just sustaining themselves on the circuit and not putting any money in the bank, you know, and maybe relying on mom and dad to help out. So, you know, the odds of making, you're not going to get rich mountain bike racing. You have to love the sport. You have to love the competition. And, you know, traveling to different courses that are so hard. You really have to embrace a tough sport. And the conditions, I went to a couple of World Cups, followed the team at Val di Sole in Italy last year, and then Crans Montana in Switzerland. And, you know, it was freezing rain in Crans Montana, a super slick course, super challenging, riders going down right and left and hurting themselves. You know, I mean, not life-threatening, but broken legs and broken collarbones and broken wrists and things of that nature. And, you know, a lot of these were U23 riders who may not be making any salary at all. You know, they're just supported by maybe their federation or their parents, or they're supporting themselves. So very tough conditions, very hard sport, and they do it for the love of the competition and the fact that they love riding mountain bikes. So not sure if that answered your question or not.
No,
but,
it does. It does. I think yeah, I mean, it affirms the suspicion I had that there isn't enough money in the sport to attract people who are not truly in love with the sport. And yes, I do wish our best athletes were paid better. At the same time, part of me also kind of rejoices in how it continues keeping maybe the spirit of the sport a bit more pure. I know it sounds a little bit cheesy to say that, Ned, going back to your early years a little bit, I was fascinated to learn that you didn't just grow up in the US. You actually spent time in Ethiopia and Iran and maybe some other places as a kid. Actually, it's funny. I spent a couple of years in Addis Ababa myself when I was small. My dad
Oh,
was
really?
working there. But I'm curious, yeah. I mean, given your, let's say, non-typical upbringing, how did that experience shape you as an athlete?
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't into that much athletics when we were traveling. Certainly no competition. It was up through. Well, first of all, let me explain how we ended up in all those different countries. My dad worked for the State Department, USAID. His entire career was USAID, which is, in these times, I mean, Elon and Trump have pretty much dissolved USAID, and they have a history of saving millions of lives over the years. So I don't know that we necessarily need to get into the politics of that, but that's why I was born in Taiwan, because we were stationed in Taiwan at the time. And then we would come back to Bethesda, Maryland, which is close to D.C., the State Department, in between our traveling overseas. So we also spent 3 years in Tehran, and it came back and then spent 3.5 years in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa. So I was active in all those places. I remember, interestingly, when we lived in Ethiopia, I had a cruiser bike, a balloon, tire, kind of a paperboy style bike, which I would ride around a lot on some rough roads there. That's when I was like in maybe the 5th or 6th grade, so 10 or 11 years old. I also had a horse. We had horses when we were in Ethiopia, so I would do some horseback riding as well. But when I came back to the U.S. in Bethesda, Maryland, I first got into sports in middle school. I went out for track, and ran like the quarter mile and a half mile, and learned to love endurance sports there. So one thing doing all that travel helped me with, I think, is that to me, I found travel natural, the different cultures, different food and stuff like that. And when I started traveling for the World Cup, it was really important to be comfortable traveling and not be so stressed about it. There's a lot of Americans, when they would travel over to Europe, the different food, the time change, that would mess with their systems. And if you're not at 100% when you're lining up for a race, because the food is throwing you off, or you couldn't adapt to the new time zone or something like that, it would really affect your racing. So I was pretty good at traveling. Always have been, I guess. I'm relaxed about it. That's key. I miss a flight. I don't like stress out and have a lot of anxiety. I just relax and just say that's part of traveling. And what's the next flight I'm going to take to get to where I'm going?
Such an interesting observation, Ned, where being able to quickly adapt yourself to a sport that is so international, where you have to travel all the time. I mean, I'm guessing more than just, let's say, tolerating let's say these changes, the disruptions. I'm guessing in some way maybe you almost enjoyed them, because I sense that travel and adventure seem to come somewhat naturally to you. I am recording this podcast, as listeners know, from the mountains of Nuevo Leon in Mexico, and I love traveling. And I sometimes wonder, do I rock climb? Do I travel so I can rock climb, or do I rock climb so I can travel? Because for me, it is just this one beautiful path that life has brought to us. I mean, it's a gift indeed. Was there a moment, Ned, as you were growing up, when you realized that there was something different about you when it came to outdoor, let's say, endurance sports? You started out as a runner, and then you morphed into other things. Was there a point when you knew that you had something in you, like I am built for this thing?
There is an interesting event that took place, and I was in junior college, and I was running cross country. And I was a pretty good cross country runner. You know, our high school cross country team won. We won the Northern California championships, and you know, it was a very competitive area. So we were good runners, but it was nothing like, you know, when I ran track and stuff. I mean, you know, there were exceptional runners. You know, guys that you know, went on to be in the Olympics and running college and things of that nature. And I didn't have that kind of speed. We were a good cross country team. And I was also running cross country in junior college, and we had a meet that was in Yosemite Valley. And so it was a junior college. It was College of Marin. And we traveled to Yosemite Valley, and, you know, we had I think the distance we ran in junior college was a 10K. You know, we had a 10K on the valley floor, you know, and I was maybe 10th or 15th, you know, in that race. Didn't have a lot of climbing in it. But then the next day, they had planned a 10-mile run to the top of Glacier Point. And it was a run that gained maybe 2,500, 3,000 feet. And it was a 10-mile. And, you know, I went into that. I won that run by a fairly large margin again. And there was like 6 or 7 schools here who had all their cross-country teams there. And that was a bit of a revelation to me that, oh, okay, well, running up hills evidently is something that I'm well suited to. And after doing that, then I kind of sought out hill climb races. I was second twice in the Pikes Peak Marathon, you know, which is goes from 7 to 14,000 feet and back down, you know, so it's it's actually a 28-mile marathon. But I was also second in the Estes Park Mountain Marathon. I've won several. When I moved to Colorado in 1980, to Durango, I did mountain runs. We have a local runs that, you know, trail runs that go up the mountains. And I won, you know, Imogene Pass, Kendall Mountain. So I won these runs. So I was, you know, it was a revelation at the time that I can go uphill well. And that's been a theme throughout, you know, when I went into mountain biking, it's perfect for that because there's a ton of climbing in mountain biking, but also in road racing.
Amazing. Well, obviously, yeah, you had some genetics to your advantage, but then there was, I am positive, an enormous amount of hard work and discipline that went into your training, your lifestyle beyond that early discovery of your talent. When you were in your prime, Ned, what was your training like? Like how brutal were those sessions?
I am in my prime. What do you mean?
Sorry, of course. Let me just be very specific. Let's say those days when you were winning those world championships.
What I would do, I'm self-coached. I've never really had a coach. I've learned a lot from coaches, and I'm voracious. I have a voracious appetite for coaching information. You know, Joe Friel I think does a great job of breaking down the training process. So I read a lot of different stuff about coaching. But what I would do in those days, there was a lot of climbing courses, you know, and the courses were, you know, it was decided on the climbs. Living in Durango what I would do is drive to a place in the San Juan Mountains where they have these very steep mining roads, 4-wheel drive mining roads. And that way, when it's a road, it's not like a trail, but when it's a road and it's super steep and long, you can just focus on the fitness, right? And it's so steep, it's hard to actually stay on the bike. And it's at high altitude, and some of these races were at altitude. So many of them were at altitude. Ski areas like Mammoth or Big Bear, California, and stuff. So I would go and do repeats on these climbs where they're so steep you could barely stay on the bike. So a lot of pressure on your legs and in thin air and stuff. And those are the kind of training sessions I would put myself through. But it's interesting. I was doing really well and maybe dominating a lot of these style races in mountain bikes. And then a young kid named John Tomac jumped in. And Tomac was a BMX champion. And he started mountain bike racing when he was about 18. And all of a sudden, this guy went downhill so fast, everybody else kind of had to recalibrate. And it was like, because he was also a strong climber, but he could gain so much time on the downhill technical stuff. It forced everybody, all of the rest of us racers, to go faster downhill. We had to improve our technical skills. So it wasn't enough just to practice my climbing and stuff like that. I had to figure out, and a lot of, going fast downhill is how you set the bike up as well. But so I had to improve. I had to essentially take more risk, go downhill faster, and think more about my downhill technique and stuff to improve in order to stay competitive with John Tomac.
Yeah, for sure. Mountain biking is maybe this kaleidoscopic discipline, right? Like there's so many challenges that are coming to you. Yeah, not only, it's interesting. Like I had Tinker Juarez on the podcast, and Tinker also was like an early, let's say, BMX prodigy. And he talked about how he has to train so much, in his case, so much for endurance. Because for him, perhaps the technical elements of like navigating challenging terrain are easier. But for the rest of us, it is being able to acquire the technical skills and maybe the bike know-how to be able to learn the technical elements. So yes, your training was, I'm guessing, yeah, so all-encompassing. How did you, given these training demands, Ned, how did you balance the line between training hard enough, right? Like you were training so much to stay competitive, but not overtraining and burning out, which is so important for keeping that fire alive. Because like we discussed, you were not getting paid in gold bricks. You were like doing it because you love the sport so much.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Finding that stress recovery ratio that suits you. Different for everybody. And it's different for people as you go throughout the season, right? When you're in less, you're not as in good a shape early in the season, you're going to need more recovery from the stresses of racing. As you get stronger and stronger, you can stress yourself harder. But your stress recovery ratio changes. And that's why it's good to have a coach, because a coach can have an outside view of what's happening with you. They can take the data of, okay, are you sick? People overtrain because they become obsessive about their training. Maybe I'm sick. Well, I still have to get the miles in, So instead of recovering from their sickness, they just dig themselves a hole. They continue to train hard. They don't recover from the sickness. When you're traveling, people get to a race, and I saw it all the time. People would, travel to Europe, arrive at a race, and they're used to putting in a certain amount of hours on the bike, and as soon as they get there, they just continue their normal training regimen, and they don't allow for the stress of the travel. And so whatever it is, being able to take a look at yourself and see how recovered you are. And of course there's all kinds of signals, there's heart rate and things of that nature that you can monitor. And that's one thing, a coach takes an outside look, especially with young kids. Young kids are definitely at risk of training too hard because they got too much energy and they're hard to hold back, right? So that's where young kids can definitely benefit from a coach. But I've always done pretty well at training hard but not overtraining, having that right stress recovery ratio. So for whatever reason, I wasn't an obsessive trainer. I don't put in a ton of volume. I still don't put in a ton of volume, but I kind of embrace the intensity. I like to train with intensity. So I think that's good, especially as you get older. I think that intensity is important to, from what I've read, maintaining a high percentage of your VO2 capacity. It's important to train with intensity. That's the kind of training that I embrace, and not doing a ton of volume. If you do volume and intensity, it's easier to get into that situation where you're overtraining. Problem with overtraining is it's all about building momentum in your training, right? I like to think of it as momentum. You're building training and you're gaining momentum towards improving. And all those little things, you get sick, you lose your momentum. You get injured, you lose your momentum. You overtrain, you have to back off and lose your momentum. So catching these things early, maybe it's a sore knee, right? Your knee is sore when you're a kid, you train through it, your body heals itself much quicker. When you're older, if you got a sore knee or upper back problem or something, you have to address it quickly before it affects the momentum in your training. So I don't know. The holistic look, it's worked well for me, however I've done it. But
Ned, I'm absolutely boggled that you were the world's best mountain cyclist multiple times, and you did not have a formal coach. That sounds. Was that a conscious decision? Like, did you learn some truths about yourself that made you maybe realize that, wait a second, like I understand myself, my gifts, my opportunities, and I can do this myself?
Well, I had to figure out how to do it myself or get a coach. I don't like the structure of somebody else telling me how to train. And I saw other people, who had coaches, and I think it worked well for them, but they would have to go from one coach to the next before they found a coach that really worked well with them. They had a rapport with and stuff. And I learned also a lot from my teammates who had coaches, and talking about what their training program was and how they were dealing with their coach. And so it was interesting to see. Again, it was about absorbing a lot of information about coaching and then applying it to my own situation. Where do I need to improve? Constantly trying to figure out how to improve, taking responsibility for mistakes I made, whether it's mechanical, whether it's going out too fast in a race, I do an event and afterwards, you might listen to guys at the finish line and there's all, I had a flat tire, I bonked, all these excuses. You have to take responsibility for everything that happened to you in the race. You had a flat tire, you didn't properly set up your equipment, you were riding with too low a pressure and too fast for the trail conditions, whatever. You crashed, that's your own fault. That's not luck when you crash. It's not bad luck when you crash. You create your own luck in those situations. So that's just been. I'm fascinated with the whole coaching process and developing fitness, and so I've been a kind of a student and still am of coaching information.
Again, Ned, I am just fascinated that you were able to coach yourself. So these days, there is just so much information out there on all of these outdoor sports, on coaching and learning and tips and tricks. There's social media, there's books, there's YouTube, there are podcasts like this one. So I'm for the everyday athlete, again, not like a world championship competitor, just the everyday athlete. How does one know where to turn to for the most useful, applicable information?
Well, you're right. There is so much information, and I think a lot of it's good information. I think Joe Friel he's written a book, Fast After 50, and to me, he lays out the steps for coaching. I think one thing you need to understand is you don't just do what some coach advises. You have to understand what the effects of that training are going to have on you. So to me, I think a good coach would explain to even a young rider, it's not just, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to, do these intervals on this day, and this is a rest day, and this is going to be an endurance day. You actually explain to the athlete by doing intervals on this day, these style of intervals, it's going to improve this system, and that's why you're going to need this amount of recovery. And we will need to determine, we're not just going to automatically do hard training the next day because it's an interval day. We're going to determine whether you're recovered enough. It's a malleable process that's adapted to the specific athlete and how their needs are changing. So to me, a coaching, a coach who explains what the different workouts are going to do for you and the different recovery things, so you understand it, and then it's much easier for the athlete to follow through, on his instructions. But people who explain the whole process, I think that's what you should look for in coaching information. How they justify it, not just them telling you what to do to get better.
How they justify it. And any other tips on being able to, let's say, wade through all that noise at a high level and finding out what might apply to that particular person? Because we are all different, and even you had to likely calibrate, learn from your mistakes, and fine-tune what worked for you.
I think you can take all this coaching information and apply the workouts to yourself, but again, it has to be personalized to you, how you're recovering day to day, right? You can't just say, okay, today is I'm supposed to be doing, this style of workout. You have to pay attention to how you're feeling, whether it's heart rate. I mean, I can feel it in my legs. Say I go out, I'm going to do some intervals today. I'm going to do some hill repeats because, yesterday was a recovery day. I'm training for this specific race. It has a similar type of climbing. And I'll go out. I will allow myself say it's they're 3-minute hill repeats. I'll do one. I don't feel so good. I don't turn around and decide I'm going to do an easy ride. I at least do another one because sometimes it's hard to, it takes you a little while to open up. The first one I may feel really crappy and sluggish, and then the second one I start to open up. Now, if if the quality of the intervals I'm doing, if that second one, gets even worse than the first one, and I can feel that my legs are sluggish and sore and stuff like that, then I will abandon that workout and do an easy recovery ride, and active recovery, and shoot to come back maybe the next day and attempt to do those intervals. So regardless of the information you're getting, you have to apply it to how you're feeling day to day and how you're recovering, right? I mean, a lot of people just beat themselves up, and they're just digging a hole of overtraining. And one thing to really realize is that you don't get better from training hard. You get better from recovering after you train hard, right? You train hard and you recover, and your body builds itself up stronger than before you train hard. So recovery is just as important as the training, as the stress you're putting on your body.
Yeah, and I mean that seems to be echoed universally across all athletic disciplines, the importance of recovery. I want to ask you a little bit about, you dominated mountain biking, but then at some point you decided to jump into triathlons. You're going from a sport where you are basically hammering the pedals, to now having to include swimming and maybe one of your earlier sports, running. So what were the hardest part about that shift for you?
It's a good question, and it's complicated. I mean, I actually did some triathlon early in the days. I went to San Diego State, and when I was in San Diego, the early days of triathlon, I did some triathlons at that time. I was a runner. I ran in high school and college, so I had a running background. And when I was in San Diego, I used to love to body surf. I was never surfed with a surfboard, but I did a lot of body surfing. I wasn't a competitive swimmer when I grew up, so that was the hardest part about getting into triathlon was figuring out the swim. That's been difficult. That's a tough sport to take on, when you're learning it as an adult. But the reason I was still fit, and I think in my prime, even though I think in '96, when I retired from the World Cup, I was 40 years old. Drugs had come into the mountain bike race scene, and it was quite evident, and it started in about '94, and I'm not just guessing about this. It turned out in the future, a lot of the guys that we were racing against were busted or admitted taking drugs, but mostly from becoming positive. They had no test for EPO, and EPO had come over from the roadside. Jerome Chiotti was one of the first guys who was popped and admitted taking drugs. He had come from the Festina team on the roadside. So road cycling, the drug issues they had, mountain biking was popular. There was money in it, and some of those athletes started coming over. And in '94, I think I won 3 World Cups in '94. In '95, I could barely finish in the top 5, even the top 10. It changed really quickly. So I was fine with getting away from mountain biking. I didn't want to travel all over the world in the World Cup to race against guys who were, who had an advantage from using EPO. So that was one of the reasons that it was very frustrating to be an international mountain bike racer at that time. So I saw the Xterra triathlon, and it was in Maui, right? And it was just beginning in '96, which was the year I retired. Go ahead.
May I interrupt? thanks for just putting a pin on that era, where all of a sudden, from dominating this sport, you faced this, let's say, unfair adversity, because there were people who were taking these substances. Just yeah. So there were people in Europe who you were competing with. What was that culture shifting? I mean, you avoided drugs, but did you see other fellow athletes get tempted and fall prey to EPO or other enhancers?
I wouldn't. Definitely. Now they weren't talking about it with me, right? I mean, if you're smart and you're taking drugs, you're not going to talk about it with your fellow athletes. But you could see the change in the athletes, and you could see it in a guy who is not young. And if a guy is 18, 19 years old, year to year, he might make some big gains in his performances. But if you have a guy that's, been racing for 5 or 6 years, and he's 30 years old, and, he's finishing in a certain place in the pack, he may move up a little bit, but he's not all of a sudden moving on to the podium or winning races. And this was happening with guys at that time, and it was pretty obvious. And so I definitely saw it. There was... Yeah, without, I would never cast aspersions on anybody and say that I think they're taking drugs and name that person without knowing, because that's, you would never want anyone to do that about you, right? If you're not taking drugs and they say, oh, because people, I'm sure they think that about me, because I did very well as a masters athlete, racing in the pro category. So there's no doubt people think that I was taking drugs. Plus, I was racing at a time when there was a lot of drugs in the sport. But I was fortunate to be in mountain biking and have success when there was no drugs in the sport. And likewise, then in Xterra, which was a new sport, and there wasn't a lot of incentive for people to be taking drugs and cheating, because there wasn't a lot of money in it. But I was fortunate. And, Dave Weens and Tomac and I would discuss, we'd be at races that we used to be competitive at, and we'd say to each other, thank God we were in the sport and had some success at it before this started happening, And since then, to be clear, I think the sport is quite clean. It's really been cleaned up since the, advancement of highly technical testing and EPO tests, and the professional cyclists today have to go through so much testing, out of competition testing. They have what they call the blood passport, which monitors your blood values year to year, and super invasive, and really a pain in the ass for the athletes, but it's one of the costs of trying to keep cycling clean. And I think there's more testing in cycling than in any other endurance sport, and partly because of their history. So I think it's good now. And yeah, I definitely saw people go down that road, and in the ways that they justified it. And similar to Lance Armstrong and some of the guys that were popped there, they were saying, oh, it's just a level playing field because everyone's taking drugs. And that's how a lot of guys started to justify it in mountain biking, right? They saw, oh, these guys who are winning are taking drugs, so that's what I have to do to win, And it was hard. It was a very hard time, in cycling. Hard to stay motivated. It was really unfortunate for young riders coming up who had to make that decision. If they wanted to be competitive, they would have to consider cheating.
And it sounds like that, you kind of astutely avoided making this difficult. I'm guessing if everybody else is taking enhancers, I mean, obviously there must have been temptation, but you chose this third route, which is you skipped to another sport entirely. Sound like you were, you had accomplished so much success, and you were intrigued, maybe fascinated by the world of triathlon. So, kind of going back to learning a new sport as an older individual, how difficult was it to learn swimming, for example, learn this whole new discipline, and then become competitive in triathlons and being so successful in your 40s?
Yeah. I was still motivated to perform, to get results. When I was, I didn't think of myself as being 40 years old. I thought myself as an athlete who still had some potential. I didn't think in those terms of age and, I'm 40, so I'm past my prime. I actually wanted to prove that I still had potential, even though I could no longer really win in those times at international mountain bike racing. So, and the allure of Maui and something different, and it being a off-road triathlon, because I love trail running. I'd done trail running as cross training the whole time I was mountain biking, usually mainly in the off season. I had a history of being a good climber. I looked at this course in Maui, and it had a massive climb in it, a ton of climbing in the mountain bike. I mean, an Xterra is a 1 mile swim, about a 20-mile mountain bike, and then a 10K run. And the run was kind of not a ton of climbing, but challenging. It was a trail run, a technical trail run over rocks on sandy beaches and stuff like that. So it was a hard run, especially after and the swim was in the ocean. So, and all of those things, and going to Maui, I wasn't sure that I was going to all of a sudden be, switch over and become an Xterra athlete. I was just doing the first one, and I got third in the first one. I mean, I trained for it. I think it was in September, so I had some time to train for the running and swimming part. I was third to Mike Pigg and Jimmy Riccatello, who are established triathletes, and I thought, okay, third, I can do this. And they started an Xterra series after that. So I mean, I was really fortunate. It was just the right time for me, and the Xterra series was in, places like Hawaii. You finish with the Xterra, and there you are in Hawaii, right? So obviously you stay and spend some time, and it was kind of cool. All my mountain bike races, generally I'm going to the mountains and stuff. There's not too many beach venues. So the fact that I got third was incentive to try and do better at it. And the next year I was second, and then the third year I won the championships. The third and fourth year they had it, but then they had a whole series. So I was supported by Specialized to kind of continue to race. At the same time, I was an employee of Specialized, working in sports marketing and product development too. So, but getting out there and racing, it's an important part of sports marketing and product development as well. I mean, Specialized has always used racing in all of its forms as a major part of its product development, right? Whether it's the Tour de France racers or the Ironman racers in triathlon, cyclocross, mountain bike, they're all arms of the product development team.
Ned, you said something which I think is so such a important mindset, let's say strategy, which is when you made your shift, it wasn't because you thought necessarily that, hey, you were getting older and you were past your prime in one thing and you wanted to start something else. Your approach was, hey, I want to do this because this playing field has changed and I'm attracted to this other sport. Maybe going to Maui and getting the chance to recreate in, like, obviously that beautiful place. And I think many people seem to not think about that, which is maybe getting older is an opportunity to to get into something new. I'm wondering what are maybe some things that an older athlete can learn from, or just anybody who's maybe hitting 40 and over can learn from your experience on being able to begin something new with that excitement, with that gusto.
So there's a few things that come to mind here. I mean, one, you say getting into new sports. There's sports that are fun, and for instance, a sport I might like to try doing, right, is I love the water. I'm not so sure I could get into surfing, but maybe kiteboarding. There's to go out and experience and give it a chance and learn the sport. Don't be so frustrated. Don't get frustrated so easy, right? And do it in a way that gradually get into the sport, get some instruction on it. When I had to learn to swim, trying to teach yourself to swim, that's not the best way to go about it. Swimming is so technical, you have to get some expertise, have somebody evaluate your swim stroke. You can't just, because you're an accomplished athlete and you've got a lot of fitness, you just can't get in the pool and figure out swimming. I mean, so I had to get some guys to examine my stroke and work with me on improving my swimming. So I think if you're getting into a new sport, and I think if someone is going to they're not mountain biking now, get some instruction on mountain biking. Don't just cry and go figure it out, because it's going to be frustrating, if you fall off or you're slow and more dangerous if you're not careful. At least, look at videos on YouTube and read about it. So I would advise people when they get into a new sport to get into it more gradually and learn about it and be open to it and things like that. Now, another thing that I think we touched on, and it's something that I've been really good at, is not holding back because of my age, because of the number, okay? Because it's so easy, and I've done it myself. I mean, I can remember a group ride starting in the spring. We do these once a week group rides in Durango, with some really strong athletes. And I remember doing a group ride in the spring. I think I was 50 and just getting my ass kicked by riders that the year before I could hang with, and I was doing much better in that ride. And I remember coming into my mind as well, okay, you're 50, this is what, age is what's doing this to you, and it's easy to use that as an excuse, and fortunately, I awakened to the fact, no, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to, in spite of just getting my ass kicked, I'm going to believe that I can still improve and that it's not just age, and age is not going to hold me back, And it's interesting. It happened recently. I did a gravel race in Ukiah last month, 50 miles, 6,000 feet of climbing. I had been in Arizona for a month before that, so I had put in. Yet I was training, focused on this event, and I performed poorly in that event for what my expectations were. And granted, my expectations were too high, but I signed up as a pro. There was 35 pro elite racers, and I was 19th out of 35. But I feel I'm capable of doing better than that. Now, I didn't prove it. The only way to know if I'm capable of doing better than that in the next event, finishing in a higher percentage of the pro field, is if I actually do it. So I had to come away from that event thinking, okay, you're going to be 70, maybe this is the new reality. And the truth is, it may be the reality, but I've got to get rid of that way of thinking if I'm going to find out if it's going to be different and I'm capable of doing more than that. You know what I mean? So I'll be doing, obviously, more races this year, and I hope to improve on that finish comparatively, if you know what I mean. But it's got to be a mindset of that's not the reality, even if it is. You know what I'm saying? In order to find out if it's not, I've got to, dig in again and see if I'm capable of examining what my fitness was in that event and see if I can improve on it. And one thing, the week up to that event, my training was going really well. A week before, I got a cold. So I had to back off my training 1 week into it. But theoretically, backing off the week leading up to the race shouldn't hurt as far as your preparation. And I felt fine day of the race, but maybe the cold was affecting me. And maybe that's just the performance I had in me at the time anyway. But do you know what I mean? Your attitude towards it.
Yeah. And that is what you seem to have this really healthy relationship with performance, where you spoke about not being fixated on those metrics. So a lot of us, who have been doing, let's say, a sport for a while, you get to some point where, again, you might start not being able to perform with the same level of technical competence. And sometimes a lot of people will stop a sport because they can't do it at that level, right? What advice would you give to people who want to continue finding that joy in their sport, but can't quite reconcile of that change in performance?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, you have to accept that you are going to lose your level of fitness and your level of technical ability as you grow older. It's just going to happen. But trying to achieve your maximum ability for your age, that means that you can't be restrained by the number, okay? And mentally, you can't be constrained. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. I mean, I'm training now. I was thinking of it just, on my ride the other day. I'll do rides that when I was younger, I would improve from them. Nowadays, it doesn't seem like I'm improving. I'm doing these rides, and in spite of the fact that I've been training, I don't have the momentum in my training, and it is being constrained, I'm sure, of course, by age. It's only natural. So I have to look at the different, modalities. Is it, sleep is one. It's different types of recovery. Nutrition is going to be important for sure as you get older and you want to improve. You just look at the different ways to maximize being able to do whatever you can for your age, not letting that number restrain you. And to be honest, for sure, I am not as good technically as I was. I ride with some young guys, and it's really important not to chase them too hard, right? Because one thing that'll really slow down your building fitness is throwing yourself on the ground and hurting yourself, and it's really important not to have too much machismo when you're mountain bike riding, mountain bike racing, because getting hurt isn't doing you any good, and I mean, it can really set you back. So it's important to stay within your ability, yet at the same time, push the envelope of your current abilities a little bit and use bike setup. Nowadays, bikes are pretty complicated, right? So knowing how to set up your suspension, how wide do you want your handlebars, what kind of air pressure, you can really improve your ability by learning how to properly set up your equipment. So, Yeah. Another thing is vision, right? I need glasses now. I ride with prescription glasses. So having the right lens for the certain conditions and having the right prescription to maximize your ability to see stuff. That's one of the things I noticed for sure that is holding me back is my vision in mountain biking. So it's something, I work on, and I try and learn about a lot with, ophthalmologists and my connection at Oakley, knowing about different lenses and stuff like that.
Ned, I have to say that I love this mindset you have, which is obviously you recognize the aging process, but you continue being curious and exploring ways in which you can use mindset, but also tools, techniques, experts to help you continue being out there doing your best. So any of your hard-won, let's say, strategies towards, let's begin with off the bike training, right? So what are some of the things you're doing that have worked for you when it comes to, let's say, mobility, cross training, and body work?
Well, for sure, cross training has benefited me. It's helped because I come from a running background, and then doing some triathlon. So the run, bike, swim is cross training I'm doing. Cycling, mountain biking is better than road cycling, but cycling can build a very specific kind of athlete with certain underdeveloped muscles and certain overdeveloped muscles, right? I mean, you just think of it where crouch.
Talking about a friend of mine who's a cyclist calls herself having the T-Rex physique.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's especially important as you get older, right? Because sarcopenia, I believe that's the right term for it, which is muscle wasting with age as you make less, human growth hormone and testosterone. So you need to stimulate those muscles to keep them going. So, but the same thing applies to when you crash. If you're more flexible and you have more upper body strength, you're able to, withstand more force. If your upper body is stronger, if you know how to crash, if you have more flexibility and mobility, you don't just hit the ground, pound, maybe you roll out of it and stuff. And doing a bit of tumbling in back in the day, even when we used to in the off season train for mountain biking, we used to do some tumbling, kind of some crash avoidance things. Some crash avoidance, it can be balance drills. So you balance on your bike. A lot of crashes happen where people get injured is when they're stalled out, right, on a climb, or you're trying to make it over a log. You get stalled out, and before you have time to pull your foot out of a clip, you fall over. You fall over, you hit your shoulder, you break your collarbone, you put your arm out, you break your wrist. So being able to balance on the bike. So doing balance drills on the bike is one of the simplest ways to improve. I mean, you can do it in your driveway. You can do it in a grass field where if you're worried about falling over doing a balance drill, you take your feet out of the clips and you just practice balancing. It's amazing how quickly you can improve with some practice of balance. Just takes a little patience. I try and do drills where I see how tight of a circle I can ride. So you have to be going super slow, like almost no speed at all. And you're pedaling and you're doing a tight circle and you have to balance. The thing about the bicycle, people say to me, oh, I have a really hard time riding tight switchbacks. And that's because you have to ride them slow. On a bicycle, when your wheels are moving, you have a gyroscopic effect. It keeps you upright. The slower you're going, the less gyroscopic movement, the more you have to actively balance the bike. So that's when you do a tight switchback, you have no movement of the wheels, so you have to actually actively balance the bike while you're trying to turn, while you're trying to brake. There's a lot of things going on. So you want to make balance second nature, and that can help you in a lot of crash situations. So things like that, flexibility for when you crash so you don't get injured, balance to prevent yourself from crashing. Upper body strength is super important, because if you get like one of my biggest problems as a cyclist is tightness and knots and pain in my upper back between my shoulder blades. And it's as you're constantly hunched over, the back is kind of hyperextended, your shoulders are rolled forward, it's a typical cycling posture. So doing exercises that open up, where you use your back and it opens up your chest and things like that. A great one I like to do is when I swim, I always throw in some backstroke, because it's the opposite of what you're doing cycling. It feels like it's the opposite of the crawl. It opens your back. It pulls your shoulders back and stuff like that. So I look at exercises that are kind of the opposite exercises of the muscles you're overusing cycling.
Ned, what I love about your approach is that it is so, let's say, beneficial for those of us, who may hate going to the gym or even rolling out their yoga mat, because it sounds like you've been able to incorporate mobility, balance, and strength work in the sports that you enjoy doing already. So they become kind of less of a burden. And maybe there's a lesson here that there are ways we can explore integrating these types of drills into our sports, where we don't have to go too much away or against the grain to do those. If besides these things, if you had to give one piece of advice to someone in their 50s or 60s who wants to keep performing at a high level, what would that be?
One piece of advice. That's a good question. I'm a little bit stumped. There's a lot of advice. I think I've managed to keep momentum and stay fit because I do things that I enjoy. And I don't overdo it. For instance, one thing I need to be doing is longer rides. Okay, and I'm just verbalizing as I'm trying to think here, and I don't do them because I have. First of all, I have a short attention span, I think. So after a couple hours, I'm ready to go home. I'm hungry. I'm ready for a cappuccino. I also have issues like arthritis in my hands. So I become uncomfortable on longer rides. So I need to figure out, I think you need to look at what things are holding you back and how to mitigate them. Okay, maybe that's what I'm learning towards. Because for me, I need to be doing some 3.5 hour rides. When I had a poor performance in this recent gravel race, I think one of the reasons is I'm not doing enough longer rides. What's keeping me from doing longer rides? It's pain in my hands. It's different discomforts. Another problem is I think I'm going too hard earlier in the ride, so that by the time it gets to 3 hours, I don't have enough energy left to do the longer rides. So I think you need to look at what's holding you back and figure out how to mitigate it. I need to start these longer rides slower. I need to maybe change my position on the bike to where I'm more upright and have less pressure on my hands, which are starting to bug me after long rides. Maybe it's more padding on the handlebars, a different position. What people can do is look at what's holding them back and don't accept it. Figure out how to mitigate it and work through it, right? And I've tried to give an example of one of the things that's holding me back is longer rides, and I have to figure out how to do that regardless of the limitations.
Totally makes sense, is to be a little bit more self-analytical about one's performance and find ways to combat them. Ned, just coming on to some final questions, taking a lot of your time. So I call this the Ageless athlete section. What is something you wish you knew earlier about longevity in sports?
I think fueling. I think it's interesting. I used to. I was more focused on carbo loading back in the day than I was with getting quality protein. So I think nutrition and being more knowledgeable about nutrition than I am now. And also fueling as you ride. One thing they're learning about these days in racing is the amount of carbohydrates that athletes are able to absorb. So I think that something I could have learned when I was racing that could have improved my performance is better quality fueling and eating better. And now I'm more cognizant of the nutrition I need. For sure, hydration is a big one. I think that I raced and trained a lot when I was not as well hydrated as I should have been. And I think it affected my performance.
Ned, you seem quite dialed about your diet. Any other hard-won things you've learned about supplementation? I mean, the olive oil one is very interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, I think quality oils. Well, recovery drinks. And I think, and I definitely do it now, is after an intense ride, when I've done intervals or I've done a hard group ride and I've really had to dig deep, when you're doing that kind of muscle strain, that creates muscle damage, it's really important to get a quality protein drink or food afterwards. And a drink is the best way to take in that protein. And so I do protein shakes now, right when I get back from a hard ride. And it's not, some people do like low calorie protein shakes, but I definitely don't have a problem with calories. And I also want to replenish some of the carbohydrates. So my protein shakes have fruit and carbohydrates in them as well. But getting a quality protein source that's easy to absorb, I think is really important. And the older you get, the protein for recovery, I think is more important.
Great to know. And then, just final question, Ned, to round it all off. Yeah, when you look back at this long and illustrious career, the races, the victories, and even the longevity, what are you most personally proud of?
I think Xterra is switching to triathlon and figuring out triathlon is something that I'm proud of because of the challenge. I mean, triathlon is really interesting and challenging because you've got 3 different sports. Figuring out the techniques on 3 different sports, figuring out how to recover when combining 3 different sports, and then figuring out how to transition from one of those sports to the next. You're fatigued, you go through the transition area, and then you've got to switch to a whole different activity. I think the challenge of that, it really kind of kept me fascinated and engaged with endurance sports when I went from mountain bike racing and having been successful at mountain bike racing. And then it's great to have a challenge and a complicated challenge. So when I kind of improved, went, Xterra from third to second to first and won some big events, that, because it's hard, it's also rewarding.
Absolutely. I mean, remarkable how, you made that switch and you were again so successful in something that was difficult and new to you. Ned, it's been amazing having you on the podcast. Thank you for coming on to Ageless Athlete today.
Yeah, great. It's been great being here, Kush, and some great questions that really stimulated me thinking about, what's helped me over the years.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Ageless Athlete podcast. I hope you enjoyed this show just as much as I enjoyed creating and producing it. Whether you are an athlete looking to push your limits or someone striving to maintain a healthy, active lifestyle as you age, there is always something new to learn. From Ageless Athlete, we bring you a fresh episode each and every week. If you liked what you heard, we would love it if you would take a moment to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an update. And if you really liked what you heard, please leave us a review, crush those 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. It helps us reach more people who are passionate about staying strong and resilient, no matter their age. Don't forget to visit our website and leave your email so I can send you occasional insights, stories, and tips to keep you inspired and motivated on your journey. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ageless Athlete Podcast and on YouTube at Ageless Athlete Podcast as well for even more great content. All of these links are available on the show notes for this episode. This show is entirely produced by me, Kush Khandelwal, based out of California with the help of my trusted adventure pup, Roger. Until next time, keep challenging yourself. Keep pushing those limits. Stay mentally and physically fit. Continue doing what you love to do. And my friends, stay ageless. Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through prior episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.